listening to the Art of Homeschooling podcast, where we help parents cultivate creativity and connection at home. I'm your host, Jean Miller, and here on this podcast, you'll find stories and inspiration to bring you the confidence you need to make homeschooling work for your family. Let's begin. Well, hey there, dear listener, and welcome to episode 16 of the Art of Homeschooling podcast, all about how stories make great teachers. I'm so excited today to be having a conversation with my dear friend and homeschooling colleague, Alison Manzer. Hey, Alison.
Hi there, everybody.
So today, Alison and I are going to share our love of books with you and talk together about a recent young adult novel that we both read. Our goal really is to let you listen in on a conversation, listen in on us talking through how we might use this book in homeschooling lessons. But first, here is a little bit about my guest, Alison Manzer. Taproot, Waldorf-Inspired homeschooling, and working together with Jean have been a very big part of Alison's life for many years. Their collaborations and friendship continue to guide and inspire her as an educator. It's mutual. She's excited to take part in this podcast and to talk about one of her very favorite things, books, and how to use them as main lesson containers. More on this concept in our conversation. Alison currently teaches yoga at Fusion Academy, an alternative high school in Austin, Texas, where she, prior to this year, also taught English and history. Alison also serves as the director of the Little Angels Service Team's Hearts for Teachers initiative, where whose aim is to lift up struggling teachers in rural India by helping them earn a living wage. So great. And you can find out more about that at the website littleangelsserviceteam.org/hearts for teachers. Or follow them on Instagram at Hearts for Teachers. So welcome, Alison.
Woo, that was a mouthful. Capturing years. As you all can tell.
And here
Jane doesn't ever get gray hair, but some of us do.
I know. It's just a genetic anomaly.
Yeah.
So first I want to start with how we met and share a little bit about our stories. Alison and I each have 3 children who are now grown, and we met on our homeschooling journey, each of us, right? Many moons ago.
Yeah.
So I think we met. You're going to have to tell me, how did we meet, Alison? I think we met at a workshop, right?
Nope.
We
met when we made these, for me, it was a long adventure across the state of Ohio to visit Barbara Dewey, who was hosting Eric Fairman for a weekend. And so we both converged there, and that's where we met.
That is so cool.
And we just each had one of our children with us.
Yeah.
Along for the ride.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Barbara Dewey is a mentor, really, of both of ours. She is the founder of the Taproot Teacher Training. I interviewed her. I had a great conversation with her in episode 1 of my podcast. And she hosted Eric Fairman, who is the author of the Path of Discovery series. So he was a classroom teacher in Australia, and he collected his notes. He worked in a Waldorf school, and he collected his notes into these grade books that are super helpful.
Yeah, I actually think this, if you're ready, or we can say more, but I think this is a great segue into what we're about to do. Because Barbara and Eric, and then, definitely Barbara mentored us so strongly in this kind of living very adaptable approach to using
Yes.
Waldorf-inspired methods, and just making homeschooling really fit your family and fit your kids. And then I feel like we're doing the same thing, trying to model this kind of ease and richness that's possible.
I
So I think that's
love
sort of
that.
neat. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And it really did start with Barbara, right?
Yeah.
Because I was trained as a classroom teacher. I needed help.
Yeah.
I needed help with this idea of kind of your home as a one-room classroom, remember, or a one-room schoolhouse. Remember, Barbara used to say that so much.
Yeah.
And so Allison and I, right, as we get into this conversation, we also then bring this same really energy and goal to these. We've created workshops at Taproot, the summer training that has now is like in its 15th year. So exciting.
Yeah. And one of our big deals was the Giver.
Oh, yes. And then we taught on Zoom before it was a thing.
Yeah, before it was cool.
We taught a high school class around the 4-book series, starting with The Giver. Yeah. So we have this love of books, each of us, right? And so when we met, there were so many things. We have each have 3 kids, kind of similar ages. Allison has 3 boys. I have 2 boys and a girl. And we just immediately, when we met, really became fast friends.
And I think we're kind of teachery too, because we both served as teachers in our homeschooling community for groups. And I think so that dynamic is definitely part of how we're wired.
Yeah. And Allison comes at it more from the history perspective and me from the language arts perspective, but we both have both, right? And I just love that. And we love working together. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So our mutual love of books. A couple of things that I want to mention. So like in the bio, this idea of a main lesson container, of a book being your main lesson container. For me, the phrase I often use with homeschooling parents is build a whole block around one book, right? And that idea can be very freeing, right? That we can be creative and curious and build something that is interesting and fun for us, as well as, right, for our children.
Yeah. And I would say, okay, go ahead. Do you have more?
Well, before we really get into it, I just want to say that Allison and I have this dream of something that we are calling the book hearth. And if you are interested,
it's like a vision board. We need to keep figuring out the vision. Yeah.
So true. And if you, as a listener, enjoy this workshop and are interested in something like this from Allison and I in the future, you can sign up for the interest list. Just go to my website, artofhomeschooling.com/bookhearth, and we'll be in touch. So this main lesson containers and building a block around one book.
Yeah. So we had such a good time doing this at Taproot around various books. As we get into the conversation around this book, I'm realizing I heard you just say build a main lesson around a book. And I'm realizing a little the way it works kind of in my idea of a multi-age setting is this one book can be the anchor for the different spokes, the different ages. And the different spokes might be doing slightly different, right? Their main lesson might be a little bit different, but this book kind of opens up this family anchor to doing something in common, but yet everyone having a little something different too.
That is a beautiful image, having this as an anchor point where everybody's doing this one book together. And then additional activities could be different for different children. And that is a really good concept and visual to keep in mind if you have multiple ages.
Yeah. And how it can be shared around this book basket. So this is very simple, very common sense, but so awesome. It's just so awesome.
Really helpful, like really a way to ground this in, to ground our homeschooling lesson planning and lessons in a more simplicity and ease.
And holistic, less random. Because in my homeschooling journey, the first thing I started with my oldest son in 5th grade was Charlotte Mason. Love Charlotte Mason. Love the concept of narration, which we can always use in our main lesson, way we do a main lesson, but felt random. Yes. Felt like my mind was in random little things. And this allows, especially when you have multiple grades, this kind of feeling of wholeness of what's going on.
And there's this phrase I often use when I compare what Steiner talked about in terms of a Waldorf-inspired approach to other approaches. This approach that we are using is really about going deep, not wide, right? That we're really diving deep into something that matters, something that is important. And that anchor can be a book. So the book we're talking about today, is called I Am Coyote. And this book, it's by Jerry Vistine or Vistine. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. And it's just a beautiful book. In a way, it's a combination of fiction and nonfiction. It's a story of a female coyote who she starts in her own family of origin and then eventually leaves and goes on a journey to find her own territory and a mate, and then, has her own family. But it's also steeped very much in science. The author is actually a carnivore conservation biologist. And there is just so much about nature and biology, and particularly about coyotes in this book that is based on, very well researched information. So that's the book we're talking about. And we're going to share some ideas, right? About main lessons. The timing of this book is so much fun. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this when we talk about ideas. But for me personally, I live in a first-ring suburb of a large city, the city of Cleveland. That means like you go drive down the hill and you're in the city. And we have coyotes here now. Very new to our area. So I have been seeing coyotes right often at dusk, and they're gorgeous and so much fun. It was so much fun to read the book while having that experience in my own life. Yeah.
That's really neat. And I think really brings to life this one about the main themes of this book, which is we are coexisting with wild animals in ways that it's really, I've seen it escalate in my own neighborhood a lot. And so it's very interesting to look at that from the coyote perspective.
Yes. And the story is told from the coyote's perspective. We have that, by the way, here too, where, we've lived here for 29 years, I think. And we never, ever saw any deer near, like walking down the sidewalk until about maybe 10 years in. And the deer have been here for a while. And now the coyotes have just come.
So it kind of is almost a laboratory for what we're seeing in the book, although these coyotes are so much more isolated from humans. I also had a deer die on my property.
Wow.
By trying to jump a fence. I live in Austin, Texas. I don't know if that came through, but and at dusk, a coyote came to feed off the deer. So, and I was just like, whoa, you immediately do feel a little bit afraid. And that's also something to explore. So I think already we're diving into some of the central themes of the book. One is how our habitat, our human habitat and wildlife habitat is like a Venn diagram. And I think if you want to do this more organized, we can talk about the main lessons, but it's amazing for local geography, like how development impacts that animal habitat for kids to keep an eye on, like when you're building a subdivision. Well, animals used to live there. So
So let's dive into the main lesson
Mm-hmm.
ideas, but let me just give sort of this overarching kind of just a list of what some of the themes might be, because we want to encourage you as the homeschooling parent to choose your way in, right? So this book could be used for a variety of teaching a variety of themes and or topics, and we're going to get into that. But you get to pick, right? So that's a super cool thing. And it depends, how you choose depends on the ages of your children, their interests, your interests, what you intuitively sense. I mean, there are all kinds of ways, right? But you get to pick, which is a very cool thing. So just a quick summary of some of the themes from the book, and then we're going to talk about what you could emphasize, because all of these might be touched on, although you don't want to get too scattered, like we said, but you can just decide what your way in and what you're going to emphasize.
So kind of a method we use together, and you out there and listening or watching, if you have someone to discuss things with or even listen to us, is that we'll brainstorm and go all over. And then Jean will say, hey, let's narrow it down to 3. So that's just kind of a principle. We let our minds go and flow, and then we come down to 3.
I love that. And so I have another mantra that I share often, which is think in 3s, pick 1. So we narrow it down to 3, and then you pick the top one that's your main priority. And then the other 2 are related, or sort of supporting that. So here's just overarching kind of list of a variety of themes. And Alison, you can add to this. We brainstormed on this a little bit together, but survival, family, because there's a lot of family caretaking, animal versus nature, wildlife protection, biodiversity, and this new one, Alison, I just came up with this morning, which is this idea of play and tend, which is just such a beautiful thing for any animal species, including humans. So I
think you really covered a lot. I put down the idea of rewilding, like how the food chain impacts, allows having every level present, allows things to come to life again in a new way. And I think a huge theme, even with all of the words you mentioned, is our perspective versus the animal's perspective. And so how survival looks to the animal in this setting, how survival looks to the human. Do you get what I'm saying? Like the point of view. Point of view changes things.
And that's one of the most beautiful things I think about this particular book, is that it is told from the point of view of this young female coyote as she grows through her life. And there are some similarities to humans, and there are some real differences to humans. And it's a beautiful read to put yourself in a coyote's shoes. So often we put ourselves, like we talk about, empathizing with other people, walk a mile in their shoes, but to do it from an animal's perspective is fascinating.
I think even wherever you go with that, I think it highlights one of the main, another mantra or principles for me was this sense of wonder. It just awakens a sense of wonder. Like I now go into my backyard and go, what's the deal with the squirrel? I'm seeing the squirrel doing this. I really don't have any idea like what's going on, so the sense of wonder and keen observation, which I think are 2 really good skills. So there's themes and skills,
All right. So let's get into that and the idea of how we might possibly use this book with different grade levels and how it can, we can use it to not only teach some of these themes, but also some skills. And keen observation is a great skill. I just want to mention here, because this isn't a specific main lesson that we're talking about, but when you're looking at the idea of teaching science, especially in the Waldorf approach, but I think in a lot of other approaches, the idea is that you start when children are young with this awe and wonder of nature and the natural world, and then that eventually grows into teaching true science as we know it, right? So before you're going to teach chemistry and physics and biology and zoology and all of those things, you're going to have experiences in nature. And so this kind of book, I think this is one of the reasons why you and I wanted to choose a book about nature and animals, because it really lays the groundwork for so many important, really, what would you call it? Sensitivities, right? Even more than skills, even beyond skills.
Awareneses, and sensory. And also, I think another theme is seasons. And that's kind of, with our book, Hearth Idea is very seasonal.
Seasonal, yeah. All right. So now we're going to get into some specifics about grades and how we might create main lessons, right, around this book. And Alison and I, we're going to surprise each other. So we just both have done some brainstorming. So to lay kind of the groundwork or the framework, I think this book could be used there's certain touch points through the grades, right? And we'll mention that with certain topics. It can go really well with subjects and topics that are suggested in the Waldorf curriculum specifically, but really for any homeschooler or any teacher, this book can tie in to a lot of different points, ranging really from second grade up till 7th or 8th grade. And so we're going to talk about some of those different points. For me, just on a super, super practical level, teaching from one book like this, it's the very easiest thing to do is to decide, are you going to read the whole book up front and then add other experiences through those, like if you were doing a 4-week block, or are you going to divide up the book into, say, I looked at the chapters and the pages, and you could do like chapter 1 through 3, 4 through 7, 8 through 10 or whatever. And you're reading around 35 to 50 pages a week. And then you're building out, like that idea Alison talked about, as the book is the center, and then you have these spokes, then you're building out the activities around that.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, me too. So let's talk about some of the specific grades and topics that we could bring to light, really, with this book, or teach, with this book. So I'll just list some of the topics within the Waldorf curriculum are in second grade, there are animal fables generally. So, and there's also St. Francis of Assisi. So if you're doing saint stories, I found in one of those crazy roundabout, looking at the author's website, going to her Instagram feed.
Oh, wow. Okay. I have to follow her. Yeah.
At a post where October 4th is known as, wait, I wrote this down. I think it's World Animal Day. And it's also the feast day for St. Francis.
So already you're anchoring this in time and space, which maybe this would be a fun October-ish book.
Or fall, and then there are trickster tales in that second grade often. So second grade has a combination of animal fables and saint stories. Zoology, human and animal block in 4th grade. You could do North American geography, because Coyote travels from one area of North America to another. You could do local geography, language arts, all kinds of ideas. And there were a couple more. Did you have any?
So I would say I love this book, My Family and Other Animals by Gerald Durrell. And I always remember he was around 10 or 11, 4th, 5th grade, probably 5th grade. And his map of Greece was an animal map. That's how we learned geography, like where are the different species. So mapping is in a lot of the main lessons, but you could do world geography because I think it's very interesting. And I realized I had sort of gotten stuck in this North American, but wild animals in parts of the world all deal with this, or have a similar stories. There's the tigers in the Chenchu forest, and there's so many places you could look at. So,
and wolves,
top predator animal, predator prey relationships in different parts of the world too. So
that's a beautiful thing.
And then tons of language arts stuff in the upper grades, but probably get into that with my main lesson ideas.
So let's start with main lesson ideas now. Let's move into that. And so for me, I'm going to begin because we discovered before we started recording that I have some ideas for maybe grade 2, grade 4, and then Allison, and this is typical. This is how our minds work. But Allison more the middle grades. So do you want to, are we ready? Should we dive?
Yeah, sure.
Super cool. All right. So in second grade, it's a wonderful year where children have made it through their first year, right, of school, and they're ready to learn, right? They have this sense that they're really ready to learn about the world and about themselves. And so there's this juxtaposition. There are generally in the Waldorf curriculum 2 blocks that are really key to second grade, and they are an animal fables block and a saints block. And so you could use this book, especially if you have older children. So a child in 4th grade or 5th or 7th or 8th or somewhere in there. This would be a great book to use to do a multi-age block with everyone together.
I want to tap into something, and I don't know. I want to hear what you think. So with the Saints story block, I've also heard that said as like venerable people. Is that true? So if you go to the upper grades and take this to a zoologist, scientist, you could get some picture books for the younger grades about, I'm thinking of Wangari Maathai, or people who had a special concern for the natural world. There's some picture. Yeah, they're not saint stories, but they could go with St. Francis. And so there's some really neat stories you could get.
Well, and the saint stories definitely have a grounding in certain religious beliefs, right? So you could, if you didn't want to go that route, then you can find other individuals who are striving for making the world a better place and making themselves better people.
And we could look at this, because this book would be like nature, animals, habitat. And so we should link some of those picture books about her.
That's a great idea. So what I was going to say about the animal fables, it's this idea. So there are trickster tales that are tales that are told in certain Native American cultures about coyotes. Coyote is the trickster. And these tales are really, all the animal fables are really meant to highlight our faults, right? As humans, we recognize in ourselves, in these animal stories where the animal, is anthropomorphized, meaning it speaks and it behaves and has relationships and all those characteristics that humans have. The idea is that we see ourselves in them. They are a mirror, right, to us. And so we see our foibles, but also the amazing strengths, right? And that being alive involves both, right? So these trickster tales, it's very interesting to me because that coyote is really seen as a mystic creature in many Native American cultures. So that's one way, right, that you could do this. Another would be, as we mentioned before, to tie it in with St. Francis and do it in the fall, perhaps around the feast day of St. Francis, and be able to explore all the stories of St. Francis's relationships to animals. St. Francis had this super special kind of, connection There has to be a better word, but to animals. And I feel that too myself since I was a little girl, right?
Yeah, and I think it brings in that, like, the better we look to all the creatures around us, the better we become. I think that author truly believes that
yes,
it's our responsibility. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
So if you were going to bring this in second grade in that way, like as an animal fable, and you had some older kids, then the older ones could be, again, have that jumping off with some ideas that we'll share in a minute. But with the younger ones, I would keep it super simple, where you're making a little diorama of the, some of the scenes from this book, or one of the scenes of, by a stream or a river, in the animal's den that's created near the boulders, and just the terrain and the beautiful images or scenes that we conjure up as we read the book. So paintings, drawings, little models of the animals and the creatures from the book. So next would be fourth grade. So this is really interesting to me too, because, Allison and I, years ago, we did this project on my website called the Steiner Cafe. And I don't know if you know this, Allison, but one of the posts is about Steiner gave a lecture about doing the human and animal block, which is a book that so many people feel stymied by. That post has gotten more shares than just about any other.
Oh, and I can't even remember what we said.
Well, so the amazing thing is that, because Steiner has this certain way of doing the human and animal block. I'm not even going to go into that now. If you want to go check out that post, do. But the idea is that we are different because of the use of our hands, right? And our will. I mean, there are many other features, but the idea in the human and animal block is that we look at different animals who have more sort of singular systems. And when I read this book, I am very aware that yes, humans have this additional capacity to make things with our hands, but these animals, these coyotes, have capacities that we don't have.
Right. I think that's where we go with this block.
Yeah.
It's really calling attention to those. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when if we were to use this for a human and animal block, I think that all these other themes that we talked about, biodiversity and what Allison mentioned, the human versus the animal perspective would just be fascinating to explore with your child in fourth grade. So I think that would be a super fun block to do. And there are all kinds of nature things you could do with that. Looking at the animals who live around you, doing tracking. Right now we have snow outside. So I'm thinking we've been watching all these animal tracks and always trying to figure out which animals are going where, because their paths cross, and it's just so much fun. So those are just a few of my ideas. I have more.
So I immediately was struck with some ideas for the older grades. One is to take the next jump up from man and animal, 5th or 6th grade. We did it a lot because I had an animal obsessed child in my household. So we had a full-fledged aquarium. And so, so zoology would be really studying the animal more closely from a scientific perspective. And one thing I learned to do when I became a teacher at Fusion, the other teachers, you probably know these things, KWL charts. Want to know, learned.
Yep.
And so you could start with something like that about the coyote, and then you could start to fill it in a little bit about the things you learn from the book, or as you complete. That's a great summary way of doing it. And even the little kid, everyone can chime in on that. Want to know, learn.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of really easy things online to do. And Acorn Naturalist, there's tracks, there's teeth, there's skeletons. You can study skeletons. You can download just worksheets on that. And then this whole idea of comparing things.
Yes.
So I think she's interesting with this predator prey, but what are the top predators or some top of the food chain animals you could study
Yeah.
and compare?
Yeah.
Um,
So wait, I have to tell you something really funny, because we watched the new Wonder Woman movie over the holidays. And at one point, one of the bad guys uses the term apex predator. And I'm like, what the heck is that? So I look it up, and it's used by Jerry Vistine on her website, which we will share the link to in the show notes. But I just want to mention here, it's coyotelivesinmaine.org. And there's so much, if you're going to do it from this animal perspective, she has so much great information there. But this term, apex predator, or she uses a different term for the coyote in particular called keystone carnivores. So apex and keystone, they are the animal that's like at the top of the food chain. And that I find that interesting when I talked about how the deer came here first in my area. Now the coyotes have arrived because the deer population has gotten too large. And so I find it so interesting, because all the humans are trying to figure out how to cull the deer population. Well, the coyotes arrived. They knew, right? And I just find that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. And so a way to bring that really home to the home laboratory is to find out what's going on in your area with this and use local resources. And this brings me to a kind of way I like to homeschool, which was to find people to talk to, and we can still do it. So there's wildlife rescue places that you could find someone to connect with. And especially your older student could either interview them or set up some kind of group call and have their questions. It would be a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah. And so
using them as a resource. Yeah.
In the show notes, Allison and I just each include, she has the a link to a local rescue organization that could be a real resource for this sort of thing. So there's a link to the Austin Wildlife Rescue.org. That's her local. And for me, there is a wildlife center at Penitentiary Glen. It's a longer link, so go check the show notes. But the interesting thing is, so I had an animal obsessed child too of mine, really two of them. But my middle son, Ben, worked at this wildlife center.
Oh, neat. Oh,
yeah, he volunteered there when he was he was a teenager or in his early teen years. And he went from there to work in a veterinarian's office. So that's just such an interesting, there's so many ways.
And such a great way to
have local ties. And even our veterinarian helped teach a little unit within a biology course in high school that I set up for a group of homeschooled kids.
So we have all these mantras, but it's expanding the circle, and sometimes you need to be the one to do that.
Yeah, as your kids get older.
And you may even know people, that you could take a walk. I know we're distanced, but there's a lot of resources to take that in that direction. A couple other things. Point of view. And I'm not so sure, I'd have to think about this a little more, but comparing point of view, like in a book like Charlotte's Web or a book like Call of the Wild for a high schooler, and taking a critical lens at that is an interesting exercise. But for creatively, and I'm going to link this in one of my surprises, and this could use drawing, it could use a graphic novel. There's so many ways we do things now that kids would get excited about. But is doing their own story, finding their own animal and doing their own story. And there's a site called Animal Meditations, which I use as a yoga teacher, but my kids, especially my younger kids, really love it. And it does exactly what this book does, but in the form of a meditation.
Wow.
So it gets into that special way of animals experiencing the world, their special, unique adaptations from that man and animal. So it'd be really fun for you all to listen to it as part of your couch time or gathering time.
Oh my gosh.
Then your older students could write their own or write their own story from the point of view of an animal.
Okay,
And
so can I jump?
Now you're getting excited, Jean.
I have two ideas. One of my surprises, and it actually was recommended by a friend. But the one thing I want to say is, for a writing exercise, it can also be fun to take a section of the book, which could be a page, right? Or a chapter, or however you want to do it, and have your child rewrite it from a different perspective. So if you were to tell it instead of I mean, this kind of varies in its perspective, but if you were to tell it as a human writing about a coyote, instead of from the coyote's point of view, it changes some throughout the book, but that could be very interesting. My little surprise, and this ties in so beautifully, is when I posted a picture, I saw a coyote on my birthday, on my birthday hike, and a gorgeous one, the closest I've ever seen. And so I feel like the coyote is my spirit animal right now. I just have those from time to time. And so I've been really reading a lot about what the mystic message that the Native Americans really got from the coyote. But there's a really cool book called The Illustrated Bestiary. And it does not have coyotes, but it has wolves in it. But the idea behind this book is to learn what these different animals, what their messages are for us, and when they show up in our environment. And so one of the reflections about wolves and coyotes is this idea of the individual versus the pack. And how we want to balance taking care of ourselves, but also taking care of our family and our loved ones. And it's such a beautiful reflection. But the fun activity surprise that I have, so they have in the back of the book this set of animal cards that have a picture on the front, and you could make a set, right? A picture on the front of the animal, and then on the back, that kind of the characteristics that this animal brings. Right?
So by observing the animal, what kind of awareness, how does that expand our awareness, really? Of understanding things more complexly. And one of my recommendations was this book, Zooburbia, which would be great for junior high through high school. And it's meditations on the wild among us. It's from a Buddhist perspective, I think, on the whole, but very lightly and very, each one short. And it's exactly that. How does this observation change?
That's so
cool. So do you have another surprise, or do we have just one more each, kind of, or one or two?
So do you want to talk about geography, or what? You go.
I wanted to talk about two things. So for the older student, just learning more about this author and her work, I think, would be great. Just spending some time on the website and letting the student direct that. And if they get into that sort of study, then they could find another animal, a scientist biography and science to go along with it. What is this scientist doing? What's their contribution around studying animals? And then the last one is around a theme.
Let me just add to that one, because I do think as kids get older, it's really good for them to begin to branch off into independent projects. So if you were doing this book together as a family, they could then find another animal that they explore on their own, which is really what Allison was saying. But I just want to be really clear that that could be their independent work, while this container is what you're doing together.
And I love always to add that element of surprise and, finding maybe animal figures, choosing, that kind of thing. Bringing just a fun vibe to it. And so the last theme is kind of around resilience, which I think is a great, hopeful theme. We get a lot of overwhelming, sometimes negative messages about future of the environment, animals, and so forth. But there's a couple resources really suited to teens or family night discussion, maybe a review. One is this movie. I love it. It's called Radioactive Wolves. And this I learned about when I taught a class on National Geographic to high schoolers. There was an article called Nuclear Tourism about going into Chernobyl. And this movie is all about the wolves coming back. So the wolves rewilding that space once the humans were out. And it's very hopeful. The wolves have been incredibly resilient. And it reminds me, it mirrors this book a lot, how they're finding their niches and niche.
Such amazing images, visuals from that. Oh my gosh, it's
and then this one's really wild, but I think some of your kids would respond. It's a TED Talk. I have to get the link. It's Rewilding, the idea of bringing back. We have the capacity to bring back from, I don't know, this is beyond me, but like the genes that we have the capacity like to clone like extinct predators.
Wow.
Like, so that brings into things kids love, dinosaurs, saber-tooth tigers. But he talks about what would happen if we did that.
Yeah.
And it just takes this up a notch and kinds of brings kids into that fantasy dystopian space they like too. Yeah. But so those are two really fun things for the older kids.
Yeah. So I want to mention one more, which is geography. And you could do it as North American or world. Geography is a great multi-age topic, right? For your lessons. And it can be brought really in a range of grades. So it could be 5th through 8th, really. You could choose, right, when you bring it. And just the little kernel seed idea that I want to share here, it's so simple, and it could be for this geography topic, it could be for the animal fables, is simply to, if there is something from your own life, an experience that you've had, share that little anecdote story, right? Story as you begin the block, right?
Yeah.
And so
that's a great idea. Yeah.
For me, if I were doing this as trickster tales or animals, human and animal, I would share, I went on a hike on my birthday and I saw this amazingly beautiful coyote.
You are freaking me out with this. This is such a good idea.
Yeah, at dusk, and it was the closest to I've ever gotten to a coyote in my life. I would just share that snippet. If I were doing geography, I would share the snippet of, I grew up in summers going to my grandma's cottage on a lake right by Algonquin Park, and that's where this coyote
connection, really
journey. And I could just share a little bit about sort of the experiences that I had there related to the land, right? To the geography of the land. We were on a lake, there were little islands in the lake, and we'd hike up this mountain and, that kind of thing. A lot of streams and water and waterfalls.
You're already building those connections and thinking, creating pictures in the mind. And then it's a storytelling technique and great circle time that everyone could share.
Right. And then I would just share what an impact, we would go in the summer and what an impact these experiences had on me and my life. Right.
Yeah.
So I
used to see the bears at the dump by our cabin in Wisconsin, but that brings up like they are coexisting.
Yes.
We would go at dusk to see the bears come into this local dump and just to watch them. Yeah.
And so often children want to hear stories from our childhood or experiences we've had, and we are at a loss for how to bring those. This is how to do it.
And both homeschooling parents can do this. This would be a great dinner table thing.
Yeah. That's great.
That's so simple. So good. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, so the last thing as we wrap up is just to say it can be really fun to put together some of these books that we've recommended into a little book basket and just have, like we often, Alison and I will say, well, what's in your book basket, around this topic. And so I just have 2 more to share aside from the book itself and this, illustrated bestiary book, is that I would have, depending on the ages of your kids, Charlotte's Web or Stuart Little, both by E.B. White, brilliant author. And he's so good at describing animals, right? At describing their character and how they behave. And then I have this wonderful book, a nature poem for every day of the year, called I Am the Seed That Grew the Tree.
That looks amazing.
And they're so short and simple. And for every single day, there's just a different poem, and you just read it. It could be part of your morning time. Yep. Maybe you just do it for this block. You don't do it for your whole year. Like, keep it simple. But
keep this circle time gathering, but keep it. Like, you could also listen to Coyote Calls. There's a lot of resources where you can, come together around something. I would say a good thing for the book basket that might really be fun, especially now, is to have this core book, our main lesson container, and then surprise your students with a go along with that book. Like, your older student could be a monograph on something, just something that that's that you whispered for them.
Yeah.
Surprise them as you open this up.
That's a great idea. And it could be like this TED Talk. It could be, another website. There's so many.
Or a magazine. I don't know.
Magazine.
Yeah. And, I lost my train of thought. Oh, and I would have a lot of nonfiction in my book basket. I would have like Seymour Simon, picture books from the juvenile section. I would have a lot of things like that.
Yeah. The Handbook of Nature Study, Anna Comstock, is a great book to have on hand for years and years and years, because you can look up any animal in there and get a little synopsis of.
Oh, and coloring books. So my last thing is, like, the book basket can have fun circle time activities. I'm not really a good hands-on artist person. I'm not the person to hold space for that so much for my kids. Some of my kids were very artistic, but a great security thing, and kids love it, are those etchings, animal etching things they can work on when you're reading, tubes of animals, and coloring books.
Yeah.
And sticker books.
Or just a little thing of beeswax or clay that they could model, create a little critter while you're
something to give you a little space and to take some of the intensity out of it. And to do a variety, like finding stickers and draw the habitat around it. Just to have some fun.
Oh, this has been so much fun. I hope we've shared some really some ideas that spark some creativity and interest for you, the listener.
And one or two ideas per child is enough.
That's
you go. A great main lesson. And the family stories, and sharing the story and talking about it, verbally summarizing, occasionally written. Just like one really cool idea is really enough.
That's so great.
Yeah.
So I love the image. And I just want to remind everybody of that the book is the container, or sort of the center of the wheel. And then you can have spokes that go off from that for different children or different ages.
And yourself, Prodigal Summer, Barbara Kingsolver.
For sure. There's so many books you could be reading for yourself. I just started The Overstory, which is about trees. Oh my gosh. So I'm really excited that's my next book after this one. I'm excited to be reading that.
Oh, I want to read that one. Yeah.
I want all of you who are listening to be sure to check out the show notes from this episode, because we've mentioned a lot of ideas and resources here, and you can find links to all of them at artofhomeschooling.com/episode 16. So go have a look there. And I just want to wrap up by asking you, Alison, what do you think it is about books and stories that lights you up?
Wow. Jean. Everything I would want to say sounds a little cliche, but sometimes these cliches are true. But actually, I'm going to go a little bit back. From a very young age and through my adult life, I didn't move a lot as a child, but I was an unusual child, as we all are, And books were truly my friends. They were that person that I felt like got me, right? Like, oh, you want to know about that? You have that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And inspired me. And as we moved, it was the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And now I notice I'm buying so many books because they're my companions on my journey as much as any person. And,
that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's similar for me that, challenging times growing up, I would get lost in a book, right? And more than that, the stories gave me connections to characters, to people and animals outside of my own
expanding. They're so
experience,
expanding.
and then drew me in, or drew me in that a different direction,
And,
which to explore, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And my Instagram, I don't do anything with. It's my personal one. Heart on the Edge is that idea of expanding the heart through this conversation, through this interaction. And, miracles happen.
And miracles happen. What a
great
place to end it. Oh my gosh.
Yes. Thank you all
so much, Alison. This has been great fun. Be sure to check out Alison's Hearts for Teachers initiative. And I just
all connected to books.
Oh,
another story.
But to teaching and to expanding our hearts and supporting each other. So that is a beautiful thing. And I just hope that listening in to Alison and I share our love for books and our ideas for how homeschoolers might create lessons around great books and stories, around a container or one book. I hope that this sparks some joy and creativity and interest for you as you create your lessons for your kids.
Yeah, for sure. You've got this.
You've got
this. All right.
Thank you so much, Alison. This has been really fun.
You're welcome, Jean. Bye.
Bye. That's all for today, my friend. But here's what I want you to remember. Rather than perfection, let's focus on connection. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Art of Homeschooling podcast.